Hi, my name is Dr. Doug Gaffin, and this is Dr. Marielle Hofnagels. We're both of the Department of Biology here at OU, and we are wanting to welcome you to Study for the Sciences, a seminar on how to take more effective notes and be a better student. Okay, so Marielle and I have taught a lot of students over the years here at OU, and we've noticed some common themes among our students. Maybe you've felt this way. These are actual notes we've gathered from real students. I felt like the exam was meant to confuse me. I took all the practice tests and I received A's on all but a few. This test made me feel like I did not know anything at all. I felt like I knew the material pretty well, but was lost when it came to a lot of the questions on the test. Or something like this. I love this one. I totally overstudied for that exam. I knew so much, I got confused. I mean, maybe you felt this way yourself. And you know, it's a real common feeling among students. But we feel there are ways that you can become a really effective student. One of the first things is to budget your time. I mean, really, so here at OU, we expect, our professors expect about 2 hours to 3 hours, at least 2 hours per credit hour every single week. So I have a 4 credit hour class. I teach 11-14. So if you do the math, that's 8 hours a week. Now, I'm not talking about just 8 hours in the week before the exam, but we're really talking about 8 hours every single week. So 8 hours the first week, 8 hours the second week, 8 hours the third week, and 8 hours the fourth week. So about 32 hours to get yourself prepared for that first exam. Well, studying a lot of time is just one thing, but it really is important to study effectively. So that's what we want to think about in this seminar. What are some of the tricks and the tools that you can use to study effectively for these types of science courses? And so what we're going to start with is your notes. Because most classes, there's a note-taking element. A lot of your science classes, you're going to be expected to come to class and take good notes and use those notes effectively. So what we're going to do right now is I am going to go into lecture mode. You're not sure what you're going to see, and all I want you to do right now is to go ahead and pull out some paper and a pen or a pencil and get ready. I'm going to give a little lecture on something you're not expecting and just pretend like you're in my class, okay? And do the best you can. Try to keep up with me as we go. So here we go. I'm going to spin around for you, okay? And I am now going to come into lecture mode. So today's class is on the urinary system. We're going to talk about controlling the internal environment. My first point will be about functional anatomy of the urinary system. We'll look at the kidneys, and then we'll go down to the individual units inside the kidneys called nephrons. And finally, I'll leave you with a little formula that involves how urine is actually formed. So let's start. Here we go. The functional anatomy of the urinary system. Well, that really begins with these structures called the kidneys. We have these at the back of our body, down lower back here. And in general, the kidneys have a very extensive blood supply. In fact, you know, they're very small organs, but they get about 1/4 of your heart output. That's a significant amount of blood compared to their size. The functions of your kidneys are these. 1, to eliminate unnecessary waste products. 2, return nutrients back to the blood. And 3, to help regulate the volume and composition of your body fluids. Those are the main functions of the kidneys. But let's look at the gross anatomy. Let's take a step back and look at these organs we call kidneys. So I'm going to make a little drawing for you here and get some of the major parts in a macroscopic scale. So here we go. Let's pan out to the kidneys themselves. The gross anatomy of the kidneys might look something like this, so do your best. We've got 2 kidneys, one on either side. And those kidneys drain into 2 structures called ureters. We have 2 of those. So urine flows from the kidneys down through the ureters, and they collect in what's called the urinary bladder. We all have one of those. And out the urinary bladder is the urethra. That's what will drain then the urine out your body. So this is just a very gross scale, macroscopic scale of your urinary system. 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, a urinary bladder, and the urethra. All right, let's look a little bit more closely at what's actually going on in your kidneys. So let me blow this up and say a little bit more about what's happening here. Okay, if you could look at the kidney, you would see it's composed of two main parts. There's an outer rind we call the cortex, and then there's a middle part called the medulla. Now, the urine from the medulla will flow into these portals called calyces, and then the urine collects in what's called the renal pelvis, and that then leads to the ureters, and now you know the rest of the story, right? Because from the ureter, it goes to the urinary bladder, and from the urinary bladder, it goes out the body through the urethra. Well, now we've got to get the blood into the kidneys, and there's this very large renal artery that takes the blood into the kidneys, but then you've got to drain the kidneys of the blood, and that's done by the renal vein, which will carry it back to the heart. All right. What about these units called nephrons? Nephrons are actually the structures that are doing the business of creating the urine in your body. So we've got to get very small and look at these. But before I do that, let me say a little bit about the nephrons. All right, what are nephrons? Well, they are the units that actually form urine in your body. There's about 1 million of them packed into each of your kidneys, so they're very, very small. Now, your nephrons filter about 200 liters of plasma every single day. Now, think about that. Do you think you're urinating 200 liters of urine every day? I kind of hope not, right? So, actually, you're only urinating about 1 to 1.5 liters every single day. So that means most of this filtrate, this plasma, is coming back to your blood. Over 99% of your filtrate that leaves your blood is actually returned back to your blood by these nephrons. The nephrons have two main parts. There's a tubular part where the filtered plasma is changed into the urine, and then there's a blood part. The blood vessels themselves consist of two parts themselves, and the first is called the glomerulus, and this is a really tight little knot or network of capillaries. That's where the filtration occurs. And the second part is called the peritubular capillaries. These peritubular capillaries then come back very close to the tubules. So we've got two main parts to the nephrons, the tubule part and the blood vessel part, and in the blood vessel part we have two parts of that. Well, let's look at some pictures now. Let's just see what's going on here. So let me clear that and show you an actual nephron. So here's a nephron, not to scale. This is way too big. I said there's 1 million of them packed into your kidneys. But there's one, and let's just blow that one nephron up, pull it out of the kidney, and look at some of the parts of it. All right, so this is the tubule part I told you about. It's a very complex structure, but you can break it down. There's an expanded first part called Bowman's capsule. That leads to a structure called the proximal convoluted tubule. Then we run down around this loop. This is called first the descending loop of Henle, around the corner and up what's called the ascending loop of Henle. We collect over here in the distal convoluted tubule and finally to the collecting duct. And that then leads to the calyces, to the pelvis, to the ureter, to the bladder, to the urethra, and out the body, right? All right, that's the tubule part, but I told you there's a blood part, and so I sketched that in here too. Over here on this part where the blood comes close to the Bowman's capsule, that's the glomerulus, that tight knot of capillaries. And then over here where it returns close to the tubule again, those would be the peritubular capillaries. Okay, you with me now? We've got the tubule part and the blood part. Now, if I'm going to show you how things flow, well, this is the way urine would flow. The filtrate leaves the glomerulus, goes out through Bowman's capsule into the tubule part, goes around the loop, and then most of it gets returned back to the blood. Whatever's left by the time we get to the end is going to be urine, and that's coming out your body. Okay, but how do we actually make the urine? You've just seen pieces and parts of the system now. Let's actually see what goes into making your urine. So urine formation can be boiled down to three things. Let me simplify the whole works here. This will be the simplified tubule part of your nephron. This will be the blood part of your nephron. So I'm going to really make this abstract and simple. All right, that's the glomerular capillaries. This is the peritubular capillaries. This part is the tubule part, and you can kind of see the Bowman's capsule, the expanded range around the glomerulus, right? This will be everything else, including the convoluted tubules and the loop of Henle and so forth. All right, there are three things that go into making urine. The first thing is called filtration, right here. That's where all this plasma I told you about, 200 liters a day, is leaving your blood and going out into the tubules. That's called filtration. But most of it gets brought back to the blood by a process called reabsorption. That's happening right here at the peritubular capillaries. So the second part is called reabsorption. Finally, there are still some things like toxins and such that have to leave your blood, and that process is called secretion. So we can boil down urine formation to three things. One, filtration, reabsorption, and secretion, and whatever's left after that is going to be urine, and that's going to come out of your body and go out, right, through the calyces, the pelvis, the ureters, the bladder, the urethra, and out your body. Thank you, class. That was our little lesson today on the urinary system. All right, so I want to ask you some questions right now. I'm going to play a game with you. This is old school clicker. And what we're going to do is I'm going to first ask you, how many pages of notes did you take? And we're all going to answer at once, class. But we're going to say seal. You're going to yell at once, seal, if you took about 1/4 of a page of notes. You're going to yell bear if you took about a half a page of notes. You're going to yell horse if you took between 1/2 and 1 page of notes. And you are going to say cat if you took more than 1 page of notes. All right, so look at your notes, and I want you to be honest and yell to me what your answer is here on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Horse. Okay, I'm hearing horse and cat. I'm hearing several things here. So horse and cat between 1 and a half a page and so forth. That's great. Well, what I want to do now is show you an example. I'm going to bring in Dr. Hofnagels now. And we're actually kind of nerdy. We're both biologists. We're also married. And we did this exact same exercise at home. So I gave the exact same lecture to Marielle. She was a very good note taker when she was a student like you. And so we just thought maybe it would be worthwhile for me to give the lecture to Marielle and then let her take the notes and show the notes so you can compare them to your own notes. So she can talk to you about the things she thinks about as she takes notes in a science class. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to bring in Dr. Marielle Hofnagels to share her notes with us. Marielle?
All right, so let me show you an example of how I took the notes when we did this in our living room. So I just want to point out a couple of features of the notes, which I'm calling raw notes, because I'll show you in a minute how I rewrite the notes later on. But just to show you, first of all, you talked about how many pages of notes you took. I wanted to show you how many it took me to get through it. But at the same time, I also wanted to show you that the date and the page number scrolled by. This is just in case your notes ever get lost as you fall downstairs. You can put them all back together again. Also, a lot of students quit taking notes when there's a picture on the screen. They'll write down every word, but they won't write down the pictures at all. You're going to miss out on a lot of information if the only thing that you ever write down is the words. So I'm a horrible artist, but I did my best to at least just get the gist of the figure, because I can look it up later and do it better when I rewrite the notes. So here comes the second page of my notes. A couple of things to pay attention to here. Again, the outline structure is really important in the lecture to show what goes with what. So again, a lot of students, they push all the words over to the left-hand margin, and it makes it really hard to remember what topics go together. So you can see the outline structure is maintained up there. And again, doing my best to sketch the figures. This one was pretty complicated, but I got down what I needed to get down to be able to recreate this figure later. What you don't want is to have whole portions of the notes missing, because then you'll never remember that you ever had that in class. So you want to make sure that you get down everything that was discussed. All right, so he went kind of fast. A lot of lecturers go kind of fast, and so you have to start getting used to making up your own abbreviations. They just have to be enough of the word for you to be able to remember what it was so that you can keep up. You sometimes see students just give up when the lecturer is going too fast and they're just like, oh, forget it, I'm never going to be able to catch up. Just get as much as you can and then go back and fill in the gaps later. It's okay if they're ugly. This is about the ugliest piece of art, I think, ever. But it's okay. We're going to make them pretty later on. All right, so quick little quiz here. What should you write down when you're taking notes? If you think it's seal, and we're going to do this all at once again. If you think it's if you think it's everything word for word, then say seal. If you think it's everything but abbreviated, you'll say bear. If you think every word but not the diagrams, say horse. And if you think it's only the things that seem important, then say cat. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Bears.
I heard bears, horses, maybe a cat. So I agree, everything but abbreviated. I think a lot of students don't do the diagrams. I think that's a mistake. And I think this is probably the biggest mistake you can make in taking notes, is only to write down the things that seem important, because when you're a beginner in a subject, you're not in a good position to know what's important. So assume everything's important. That's why they're spending your class time on it. Figure it out later if it really was or not. All right. So the other thing that I want to say about this is to rewrite your notes as soon as you can after class. I said as soon as you can. It doesn't have to be like that day, but at least once a week. This is a good way to use your 8 hours a week of studying for your science classes, to take the time to rewrite your notes, because that helps solidify a lot of the information that you went over. So here's what they look like when they're rewritten. I'll show you the features of them. You can, again, see a lot of the things that we've already talked about, but it also looks a lot tidier. So again, the outline structure is really obvious. I'm not afraid to just indent things that go together, because that really helps you to remember the material. I now have full sentences and few abbreviations. So at this point, why not? You've got all the space in the world, you've got all the time in the world. Why not make it easier to study your notes by using whole sentences and full words? I've also gone and looked up the figures where they are in the textbook. So even though I'll never be able to draw a good kidney ever, as long as I live, there's a really good one in the textbook. And so when I want to go and see a good picture of a kidney, I already know what figure it is, so it's easy for me to go back and find it. So here's the second page of the notes. Again, the figures are greatly improved. I hope you've noticed that. And it's also clarified based on information from the book, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the nephron. And so I've gone and looked at the book, and I've filled in the gaps about some of the details. Like here, the proximal convoluted tubule, it's not really straight. It's really curly. It's really going in a lot of directions. We've got it simplified here. But I just got a few little extra things that will help me remember what's going on. The other thing, this lecture went on longer in our living room than it did actually in this lecture, but I wanted to point out a couple of other things. Like I didn't understand this thing that he was talking about, so I jotted down a little note in the margin so that if I go to office hours, I know exactly what I wanted to ask. It wasn't just, oh, I didn't understand the urinary system. I didn't understand this one thing about the urinary system. Here's another one that I didn't understand. And then, here's a question. If you ever see a professor ask you a question in class, a practice question, write it down, because there's a reason why they're showing you that example. And the reason is they're going to want you to know how to do something like that on the exam. So there's no crime in writing down that question and the answer itself, and then you can use that to test your knowledge later on. And I wanted to show you, so I can talk to you about study skills for a long time, and you might not think that you're going to pay any attention because I'm a whole generation older than you, but I wanted to show you that actual OU students do this to earn A's. This is a student who was in our freshman mentoring section quite a couple of years ago, and we were talking about study skills with our freshman mentoring group, and she said, oh, here's how I do my notes, and it was exactly what we've just been talking about. These are her raw notes from her biology class, and then she goes through and rewrites them. This wasn't after seeing our presentation, it was just what she does to study. And she's doing a lot of the things that we're talking about, referring to the page number in the book. She's got the outline structure going on. She's got important headings highlighted here. She's got, again, with outline structure, a little diagram there. So she's doing everything that we were just talking about in terms of good practices for rewriting your notes. All right, so that's the first thing I wanted to talk about was notes. The second thing we want to talk about is flashcards. A lot of students use flashcards to study, but a lot of students don't use them very well. So I want to talk about some best practices for using flashcards. And the way we're going to do this is to just have you take the time to, I know you don't have cards, but you can just do this in your pages, write down 3 examples of flashcards that you could make from this page of notes. So let's say you were studying and you were going to make flashcards. Just write down 3 examples of questions that you could ask on flashcards, and then write down what answer you would put on the reverse. All right, has everybody got something? Okay. Let me just show you some examples of the kinds of things that I'd be looking for here. One of the things that students often do is they'll put nothing but vocabulary words on flashcards. And what I want to recommend to you is that you actually put questions, a question that you would actually see on an exam. So this is something a professor could ask you. What are 3 functions of a kidney? And there are 3 functions of a kidney there. Or what are the 4 main parts of the urinary system? And so then on the back side, you would list the 4 main parts of the urinary system. Or what are 2 main regions of the kidney, right? Or you could do a blank diagram and on the other side have the labels on it. But have a question, because your professor is never going to ask you medulla, right? That's never going to be a test question. But they might say, you might be asked to know whether the cortex is on the inside or the outside of the medulla. That's something that actually tests a concept that you would have to know. All right, so what I'm trying to tell you is that the prompt on the flashcard makes all the difference. Vocabulary drills are okay, but they're not sufficient. You really want to be writing yourself realistic questions that might actually appear on an exam. And then you can share them with your friends. You can test yourselves on each other's flashcards as well. All right, so the main point here is that the prompt on the flashcard makes all the difference. You don't want to just do vocabulary drills. They're okay, but you're not going to test the most important relationships that way. It's much more beneficial if you aim for a realistic question, something that your professor could actually ask you on an exam. The other thing that I really recommend is that you write down the answer on a piece of paper before you peek at the backside. And the reason for that is that you totally cheat, right? When you're just doing it in your head, you cheat. You're like, oh, I know that, I know that, I know that. But until you actually try to write it down, that's when you prove to yourself that you actually know it. So I like showing student examples of flashcards. And I wanted to show you the student that I had in my class. Her name was Taylor, years ago, who didn't do very well on an exam. And I said, how are you studying? She said, I'm using flashcards. I said, can I see them? And she said, yeah, and they were a disaster. And so it was perfect for this. I asked her, could I scan them in and use them in our studying for the sciences seminar, because they were just such a great example of how not to do flashcards. So here's what she was doing. She would put one word on one side, and then the answer would be just a bunch of random facts about that word. This is the most common kinds of flashcards that we actually see. So this isn't what you want to do, because you're just memorizing this load of terms that have to do with this word, but you're not actually putting together any pieces. So the better way to do this would be, again, as I said, to actually ask a realistic question. What elements make up 96% of your body? And here they are. Let's not put in any extraneous details. Let's just stay with the one question that we've asked. Here's another one, just the word organic. So we're learning about organic molecules. And then again, a definition of organic and 4 examples. But there's nothing on that side of the card that suggests that that's what the other side is going to contain. So a better way to do this would be, what's the difference between organic and inorganic molecules? And here's the answer to that question. Again, a much stronger study tool this way. And the last one was great. I was really proud of her, because this isn't one that we'd done in the notes. This is one that she thought of an application question and put it on a flashcard. And I thought that was a great example. Is water organic or inorganic, and why? And she explains why it's inorganic. So this is a great, if you can think of application questions, go for it on your flashcards. Okay, So the third thing I want to talk about is the difference between memorizing and understanding. I think that a lot of students coming out of high school don't really know what the difference is. They think that if they've memorized every vocabulary word, that should be enough to get an A in the class. But it's not enough. To do well in college-level science classes, you have to understand how all of the pieces fit together. This is vital, is to be able to make connections. So the problem with memorizing is that every piece of information is a separate item, and there's no way of understanding how they relate to each other. So research shows that the more connections that you can make among the topics in the class and between what you're learning in the class and what you already know, then the deeper your learning will be. So whatever you do when you study, you need to be reinforcing connections, 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 always connections. So I'm going to show you a tool called the concept map, which is a great way to move from memorizing to understanding. And it's really easy to build concept maps. There's only 2 rules that you have to know. One of them is that the words that are going to be in your concept map go in boxes. And the other one is that you're going to connect those boxes with arrows, and the arrows get labels that describe the relationship between the terms. So I'm going to show you an example, and then we're going to do one with the urinary system material. So let's say I said to you, make a concept map using the words bicycle, math, bus, and lunch. Then one possible way to build a concept map would be to put bicycle and math in boxes and to connect them with an arrow that says, if the weather is nice, I ride my bike to math. Here comes bus. If it's snowing, I ride the bus to math. And math is the class that I have right before lunch. Right? If you'd have done this on your own, you would have done it differently, but it still could have been correct, right? So that's a great thing about concept maps, is that there's more than one right way to do them. All right, so the trick is you have to use all the words, right? No stragglers are allowed, just like there is no place in the world that you can't get to from someplace else. There shouldn't be some terms that are over here on an island all by themselves. Everything has to connect, and they have to be joined with arrows. All right, so what we're going to do is try one using words from the lecture. And so we're going to start with 5 words, and I'm going to list them over here. So go ahead and call out 5 vocabulary words from the lecture that we just did.
Nephron. Urine.
One more? Bladder. Okay. Okay, so somebody just tell me 2 of these terms and tell me how they would be connected with each other.
Nephron is the functional unit of the kidney.
Okay, great. So then we put it in nephron, put it in a box, put kidney in a box. All right, so now I could cross off kidney and nephron. Great. Okay, but let's connect to this one first, because I don't want to have any little islands and make it awkward. So let's build off of what we have.
Urine is made in the nephron?
Okay, great.
Blood is a part of nephron.
Blood is part of a nephron, okay. Yes, I can connect my bladder now. All right, so this is only 5 terms, right? But there were probably 20 new terms introduced in that lecture. So a really great studying exercise is to have a group of you that's all working on individually on a concept map with the same 20 terms, work on them individually, and then come together and compare them, because no 2 people will do it alike, and you'll learn from the way that each other has conceived of these connections, and you'll find out where you're going wrong as well. This is a fantastic way to study. So the same student who was working with the flashcards also totally bought into this concept map idea. We do this in lecture with maybe 12 words. It dawned on her that if you can do it with 12, you can do it with 20. from a lecture. If you can do it with one lecture, you can do it with two. If you can do it with two lectures, you can do a week. If you can do a week, you can do a whole section of a class. So this was her concept map for the first 4 weeks of my biology class. And she would come to my office hours, unroll this thing, and when another student would ask a question, she would go and consult with her concept map and see if she could figure it out before I would answer it. So this turned out to be a fantastic study tool for her. This is a close-up showing all these connections among the different topics that we learned, and she got a huge amount out of doing this exercise. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gaffin again, and he's going to talk about one more study skill.
Okay, I want to talk to you about another technique that was really useful for me. We learned about the concept map, but I call this the blank paper. It's really not rocket science at all, but it actually made a lot of difference in my own career as a freshman. What I want to ask you to do is simply get out a blank piece of paper and write down everything you can remember about a figure I'm about to show you. So I'm going to show the figure. It's one that we saw in the notes before. But then I'm going to take it away from you. And the reason I think this is so important is to confront yourself with a blank piece of paper is because I don't know about you, but I remember vividly in my dorm room as a freshman or sophomore in college, sitting the night before on the bed of my dorm and just thumbing through my notes, feeling like, yeah, I know that, I know that. Yeah, I know that, I know that. And then I got to the test and it didn't look like my notes. I really didn't know it. I recognized it. So what I learned is that we have to eventually challenge ourselves to see if we really do know it or understand it. So I used to sneak into rooms. There are chalkboards or there are whiteboards all over the campus. You could just do this in your dorm room with a blank piece of paper, or you can go out to the library. There are lots of free spaces to do this. So it's a really simple idea. So what I'm going to ask you to do is simply show you a figure. Here it is. I'm going to show it for a few seconds here. Let you think about it, really. This is like you studying. You're thinking about the relationships in this figure right now. You're thinking about how the tubule part interconnects with the blood part. You're thinking about the labels, even the flow of blood, and so forth. And so after a while, I'm going to take it away from you, and I'm going to do that now. And now I want you to, on a blank piece of paper, go ahead and try to write all the details that you can. Start with a new sheet. Don't cheat. Don't go look at your previous notes. Just see if you can reconstruct that nephron. Can you label up the parts? Can you get the urine flow correct? Can you get the blood flow correct? Let's see how much you can do. This is a really critical step because it's just you and the paper. You don't see your notes. You don't have any cues. It's just you. It's almost like you're trying to explain it to somebody else. Sometimes you'll find that, well, okay, I've got the basic layout, but I couldn't remember, was it the proximal or the distal there? What was the loop of something, all right? So it's legal, once you get stuck there, you may realize it started with an H. Or maybe you didn't. If you're not quite sure, then you go back to your notes. So here it is again. You can kind of check yourself. Oh, it was the loop of Henle. It was the proximal convoluted and the distal convoluted. Maybe you forgot what it drained into. And then I'll take it away again. So you fill it in. So it's a back and forth thing. And I just found after several iterations of this, of actively working with the material, I could get it down. I could write everything, I could draw everything, I could explain it to anyone. Want to see it one more time? Just to double check your notes to make sure we're on the right track. This becomes a really powerful technique. It's really simple, but it's just a necessary step to move from just recognition to understanding. We also say another idea is just simply to write a paragraph. Maybe you can write down the figure, but can you write a full paragraph in your own words that explains not only the anatomy, but also the function of the nephron and how it works? If you can do that, you're ready to go. Okay, I think we're doing very well today, and I just want to conclude this whole little exercise by seeing if all this studying is paying off. So we've got 3 simple questions. Well, some are simple, not so much. So as you know from your exam, some of the exam questions might be easier than others. Let's see how all this studying is doing right now. Okay, urine forms in the, so we're going to do the same game as before. You're going to say seal if you think ureters. You're going to say bear if you think nephrons. Say horse if you think it's the heart. Say cat if you think it's the bladder. On the count of 3, we're going to say where we think urine forms. 1, 2, 3. Cat. I hear cat. 1, 2, 3. Cat. I'm hearing cat and bear. Okay, well, I kind of think it's the nephrons. It's bear there. Okay, we might need to study just a bit more. Let's move on down to this question. Which of the following is not a function of the kidneys? Maintain body's water balance, maintain salt concentration of the blood, produce urine, eliminate undigested foods. Which of these would you say is the best answer for which is not a function of the kidneys? 1, 2, 3. Cat. I'm hearing cat. Very good. Eliminate undigested food. That's another system altogether. And finally, a little bit harder one. Let's see if you're paying attention. Which of the following is a correct order for structures that a water molecule passes as it moves from your blood system and out your body as urine? Would you say that? Would you say that? Would you say this? Would you say that? Study on it for just a bit here. And then on the count of 3, we're going to cheer for our best answer here. There's only one that's in the correct logical order. You guys ready? You ready? I know, it's a tough test. Let's try it. Which one is in the right order? I got to look at it myself. Let's see here. I think I got it. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Horse.
Oh, I love it. Very good, class. It is horse. All right, great job, class. And I want to thank you all for coming to this seminar, Study for the Sciences. Now go out and study like a champion.
Thank you.